Hello, and welcome to the Wanderings podcast, a photographer's exploration of art, science, and world culture. I am your host, Pedro Bonatto, a fine art and advertising photographer based in Toronto, Canada. In this show, I talk to artists, designers, scientists, filmmakers, authors, entrepreneurs, people who are creating inspiring work in a variety of fields. I have been working as a professional photographer and as a musician for a few years, and I'm often inspired by history, science, mythology, and popular culture in the photographs that I create. In this podcast, I try to go a little bit deeper in the stories that inspire me, and I hope will inspire you too. On today's episode, we explore the reimagined worlds made possible by computer-generated images, also known as CGI, that are becoming ever more present all around us, from movies to advertising to art. My guest is Brad Pickard, a post-production and CGI artist whose work blends realistic elements created in a computer with photography. Brad's work is wide-ranging and includes automotive, environments, creatures, character development, typography, liquids, animals, you name it. We talked about how the technology changed over the years and his journey as an artist. We talked about the cutting edge of the field, including artificial intelligence and virtual reality. I really like Brad's attention to detail in his works and his way of collaborating with photographers to create images and sometimes whole worlds, which would be impossible even a few years ago. We recorded this at my home studio in Toronto, and it was a really cool conversation. Two guys talking about art and technology over beer. So I hope you'll enjoy it and join us. So here's my conversation with Brad Pickard. Again, thank you for coming. So,
not a problem.
First thing, cheers.
Yeah, cheers.
Cheers. Cool. So, Brad, welcome to the Wanderings podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, sure. And it's cool. Like just for our listeners, since it's an audio podcast, we are recording with nice beer that Brad brought to us. So hopefully, I will not make a fool of myself. So. Brad just got to my place here in Toronto, and then we started talking a little bit about that he listened to Mike Deodato's interview in the podcast before. It's like, if you haven't heard, you should go listen. He's like a great comic book artist. And then we're talking about the fact that you actually used to draw, right? So draw and paint. So can you tell a little bit about your like your background in that area?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I used to draw and everything ever since I was a little kid, and then. A few years back, I kind of stopped just because I kind of, just focused more on the CG aspect of things. But I do kind of miss it, just the tactileness of it all. Mm-hmm. It feels, there's something that is lacking, working on a computer. It's just not as hands-on. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then so you studied like drawing like in school, or just for yourself?
Yeah, I took a program called Digital Media Arts, and it was illustration and computer animation, and a little bit of like web design and Photoshop, like a little bit of everything. Mm-hmm. But actually, my illustration teacher drew for Image Comics. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize that until halfway through like the semester. I was pretty blown away. He showed me some like actual, drawings from the pages and everything.
Right. Yeah, and Image Comics is like they revolutionized the way comic books and graphic novels are done. And so that where did you study that again?
Seneca College.
Seneca. Okay, cool. All right. Yeah. And then after that, you went into like more into CGI, right?
I kind of got out of CGI for a while. I think I graduated back in like 2000 or something like that. Mm-hmm. And the realism wasn't quite there yet. And I kind of wanted to go with like create more still imagery. And so I got out of it for a few years. And then I jumped back in when that realism was really starting to get, easier to achieve.
Yeah, cool. And let's get into that. So I got you in the podcast because I'm really impressed by all the work you do in CGI, and how I like the fact that you combine the CGI elements with photography for clients. So can you tell a little bit about, for the people that eventually are listening in the podcast, we have a wide range of people that will listen. Can you tell a little bit what CGI is and how it's applied, how you use it?
Yeah, it's basically like modeling and sculpting within a 3D program. There's texturing and lighting and everything. I work with either photographers, or I'm hired directly by agencies, and it really ranges. Some things are entirely done in CG now, and when I'm working with a photographer, sometimes I'll go to set and I'll see their lighting set up. So you can match it pretty good in CG. Lighting has come a long way, even in the last 6 months. I mean,
oh really?
It's crazy.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, so you would say that there are 3 components to CGI, like the sculpting and the making the object, then putting texture on it, and then lighting the object. Would that be a fair assessment, or is there more steps to what you are?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's it's all about composition too. A lot of photography, focal lengths and everything like that, transfer over to CG as well.
Oh, I see.
Especially when I'm combining photography and CG, you definitely have to make sure you get your lensing right.
Right.
I mean, that's one of the things with I've seen it done badly, and usually it's right off the bat, it's the lensing that they get wrong.
Oh, I see. Because then your eye can always catch the proportions, right, or the angle that you are doing, or some lens effects that appear, focusing. Sometimes the 3D object gets too much in focus. Right?
For sure. Yeah.
Okay, definitely. Interesting. Yeah. And then I know, I remember you did very cool series with a photographer recently that I saw on your Instagram, and you'll have links in show notes for people to see your work. And I remember it was also there is this element of realism, and at the same time there's this element of larger than life things. So it's a bunch of zombies or dead bodies or something. So how do you feel about having the realism aspect of it apply to, say, surreal or larger than life things? How do you approach that?
Well, yeah, I think you're talking about that. It's an image I did with Matt Barnes, and he basically photographed this guy is Saint Michael with a giant sword, and basically there's a whole bunch of I think he had 30 naked people in the studio, and posing as demons, kind of clambering their way up towards Saint Michael. And he gave me a call, and he was saying can you build me hell and some giant angel wings? And I was yeah, sure. With that particular image, you kind of you're making up hell. Nobody's ever seen hell, so I think that's probably where you're getting it looks real, but it's
it's of course no one saw it or may not exist, but it's still, you need to convey it in a way that looks real, right?
Absolutely.
That's cool.
Yeah, for sure.
And then so you work basically mainly with commercial clients with advertising, or how does that what's the bulk of the work you do today?
Yeah, so like I said earlier, I either work directly with photographers. If they can't, if they don't have a budget to have a massive piece built, or sometimes it just makes sense to do an element in CG and add it to their photography. And sometimes I'm hired directly by ad agencies just to do everything just full CG.
Yeah, I assume this would be more product shots, cars or refrigerators or things like that.
Yeah, but it's some of the things that I never thought were going to be CG are starting to be CG. You're seeing a lot of food nowadays that's pretty realistic. It's kind of even 2 years ago, I would have said food will never be done in CG, but people are 3D scanning food, and if you get your materials and textures right, you can make it look appetizing, which is what you want with a food ad, right?
Yeah, and probably much easier than I've never had to photograph food for my work, but I've seen some tutorials and some photographers talking about photographing food, and the tricks they have are insane. Like it's I don't know, it's not my thing, but yeah, it's very hard to make them appetizing, right? And especially digitally, that's interesting.
Yeah, I used to work at a photo studio, and I seen some like tricks before, like with a cereal ad, the milk would instantly make the cereal all soggy within like minutes, right? And so they would actually use like Elmer's glue, like white glue, and then it'll just stay. It'll stay in place. It'll always look nice and white. And
yeah, you never know. That's why whenever you go to some fast food chain, sometimes you see like this beautiful photograph of a hamburger, and then whatever you get, it's like, this is Photoshop life. This is not quite there.
For sure. Yeah. Well, another one I heard was motor oil on pancakes.
Wow.
Because apparently it doesn't soak in, and you just have more time to shoot.
Right. Yeah. Now with the CG, then I guess it's like infinite time, right? And then so you work mainly. I know CGI, like we all see it all the time, like as like the general audience, like in movies and everything. Like basically, half or more of what you see on screen is done on a computer, right? So do you work mainly with like more still imagery or do you work with the more animation or like a cinematic aspect of it too, or where do you work?
I guess like the stills, can be viewed as almost cinematic in a way.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I am getting in more and more into like animation. There is like one program that I've been working with recently called Clarice, and it's basically like a scene builder, and they used it in Star Wars and a few other movies.
Oh, okay.
And it's just, I don't know what kind of black magic they use for it, but it's just you can just basically throw like as many polygons as you want at it, and the thing just does not bog down. It doesn't break a sweat.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Clarice is the name of it? Oh, okay,
yeah.
I haven't heard of that. So in terms of like, just to talk about your like toolkit, right? You use, can you talk a little bit, this is a bit more geeky than but it's interesting for people that want to get into this kind of thing. What kind of software is used for creating CGI elements?
Well, I mean, there's a whole bunch of different packages out there, and everybody has their favorite, and there's a few out there that do some things better. My main one that I really love is Modo, and then I just bring everything into like Photoshop or After Effects after that.
Oh, so you create the 3D object in the specific software, and then you bring whatever like rendering of it, I assume, or is the actual object that you bring?
Yeah, so like my main renderer is everything is inside of Modo. That's where I like light, texture, render, and sometimes I'll sculpt or something in a program that like ZBrush and bring it into Modo. Modo is always the thing I bring my objects into and output.
Cool. All right.
Yeah, so I'll render out giant still images and bring them into Photoshop.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So that's like already when you already have the perspective, and you already have like basically all the world has been built, and then you bring it to Photoshop to blend with whatever photographic or other kinds of elements you need to put on the photo. Cool. All right.
Yeah.
And then I know that there is one software that is for people that would be interested in like trying it out. That is, I think there is like an open source version of it. I think it's Blender. Is that the name of it?
Yeah, Blender is a good program too. It's free, so it actually has like quite a community behind it. All these programs they usually have a pretty good community behind it. That's why I like Modo so much as well. But Blender is like it's not a bad one to get into, for sure.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like, as like for people that would like to give it a try, it's so funny that literally, if you have a computer, you just go on a website, you download it, and you can create 3D like elements, right?
Yeah.
And how about, because I remember like referring to my conversation with Mike Deodato, he was saying that he uses a lot of Google warehouse elements. That is the like on Google, they have this library of already made like 3D objects. Have you used it? Have you seen it?
No, I don't know that one. No.
Yeah, it's like what he was saying.
It's
that
probably like a SketchUp type.
Yeah,
thing,
it's a SketchUp. Yeah, so it's probably not as robust or as detailed as you usually need.
For sure.
But what he was saying is that he uses, if you need, like you were saying, give you the example of like a machine gun. So he needs a machine gun from the, I don't know, like Second World War. So he goes there, he takes the object, he sees, he rotates the object and see from the angle that he wants, and he basically like draws it like based on that. I was just wondering if there is like, if you use any kind of like library, or if you create everything from scratch.
Yeah, like see, those models would just probably be too like simplistic for photorealism. But like, I would, if an art director, contacts me and they don't really have a layout and they want to like, have a pre-visualization of something, sometimes I'll like download some really simple models and I'll just like throw them into a scene really roughly. It's a really good way to,
think about it.
Yeah, just layout purposes, pretty much. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then
in his case, he's probably like illustrating over top of it and adding like all the detail there, right?
Yeah. Like, and he does all the. This is basically just for him to have like the proportion, know exactly like, oh, this barrel goes here, or like this car from 1940s, instead of going after like a photo and trying to see the angle that he wants to shoot at. He just pops it into Google Sketches, just because he was talking about speed, right? So and that brings me to like a question about what's your process. So you get like the sketch or the idea from, let's say, from an agency in that example, and then you start building the scene. Can you take us through the process from like, you get like the first sketch and to the final image? Like how does that work?
Yeah, usually they give me a layout, which is usually just like a rough pencil drawing. Then I'll just start like blocking it out. I won't worry about textures or lighting or anything like that. I'll basically get their sketch like into the program, like as a backplate. And, I'll really start trying to match that as much as possible. A lot of times art directors have like put a lot of thought into like their layout and everything and composition right from the get-go. And you have to execute what they want, and then so you do that, and then add like the final images if you're working with a photographer, like the final still image that the person shot, and then trying to fix the like lighting and blend colors and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And then cool. And then like and how long does that process take? I know it will, like just like with photography, I know it will change. It will take between 2 hours to 40, 50, 60 hours. But like, what's a regular like time that it takes for you to do one of these jobs from like start to finish? Yeah,
it really varies. I'd say the first like 80% of a job I always find goes pretty quick, and then the last like 20% is like takes the longest. I mean, it's like just perfecting it after that.
Do you have an experience like when you create stuff for yourself? I assume like right now I know you're very like busy with work, but when you create your own like portfolio images, are you collaborating with other like photographers to take the still images, or is it something you do as well, or how does that work?
Well, I've done a lot of collaborations with photographers before, but I'm kind of taking a little bit of a hiatus on that because I have a lot of projects rolling around my head that I want to do myself.
Of course.
Yeah, but I mean, if it's like a little photo element or something, maybe I'll take it myself. The stuff I do in my free time is more like almost entirely CG.
Okay. Yeah, stuff like what?
Oh, I'm working on this like half cyborg woman right now.
Oh, cool. All right.
Yeah, and she's like she's made up of like 3D scan data and some modeling as well.
Okay, cool. So can we talk a little bit about that? Because that's something that is I saw like 3D sketch or something like the software from Autodesk that you can scan things with your phone and then it will do like the. Can you talk a little bit, because I think people, I know about that, but like it would be interesting to talk. So there is this softwares that basically you take still photographs of it like around them and on like 3D space, and it's sort of like reconstruct that object in the 3D environment. Is that right?
Yeah, it's like photogrammetry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then they have like 3D scanners, which like fire like lasers essentially at the object. Yeah, it's becoming much more common. If you like, photogrammetry doesn't quite have the amount of detail as an actual 3D scanner. I mean, I forget the measurement, but it gets down to like microns or something that, for the amount of detail. If you're scanning like a shoe or something like that.
Oh, I see. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Yeah. And that will, I assume this kind of thing will probably bring even some kinds of photography like obsolete, right? In a way, like especially product photography, the way that I see these things sometimes, even cars, you see like it's entirely CGI. Then it's, I don't know, like it's just something that I don't work on that field specifically with like objects, but it's something that it's like, oh wow, it will, I mean, photography in the traditional way of getting the object and lighting it, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's ever going to go away, but things like cars, maybe, if all the CAD data is already there, you know what I mean? It's there when they design the vehicle. It just makes more sense to like bring it into a 3D environment and do it that way.
Yeah, and by the CAD data that you're mentioning is, just for people to know, is basically the blueprint to build the actual object in the real world.
Yeah, right down to every nut and bolt.
Right. Yeah. And then about that, I've seen some people doing like based on 3D objects. I've seen some people doing actual like 3D printing of objects. Like you can take like a photo and scan. There's a company here in Toronto that does, and I think all over the world, they're probably around. They will scan you using this laser technology, and they create a 3D representation of you, and then they make you basically an action figure based on on you. So is it something that you have explored with your work or not yet?
I've used like 3D scans of people. They don't work. They need a lot of work. You know, a lot of texture and material work has to go into like a 3D scan. It's not like you can just scan somebody and load it up into the program and it looks real.
No, okay.
Just because skin is such a complex material. I mean, if like light kind of like bounces kind of like inside of skin, bounces around a bit, like there's subsurface work going on there. So that people have spent like years trying to get a nice looking skin material that like lights naturally. And they've gotten some pretty good results. There's some really amazing like skin materials out there, subsurface scattering and all sorts of controls.
Oh, that's interesting, because that's one thing that I wanted to get into. That is, I was reading, but that's more from a psychological point of view, that people were saying you probably heard about this, like the uncanny valley, the idea that like whenever you get, the more realistic a person specifically looks, the more eerie and different and not really real it gets. Like I remember in that movie Beowulf, that was all 3D scanned, and you have like Angelina Jolie as the devil woman based on this ancient myth. But then when you see the person, you have actually the acting of Anthony Hopkins, but then there is something about the movement that is so realistic that it becomes this, they call this uncanny valley. It's like, oh my God, like this is not real. And then people discuss if it will ever get, I think it will get there to the point that it will be indistinguishable from reality. But it's interesting that there's all these elements that people are discovering like this. I didn't know about this, like scattering of light inside the skin that makes even like glowing depending on how.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. Like the 3D scan that I'm working on right now has probably about like 20 different materials. And I mean, there's like a subsurface scattering. There's like, there's even like material layers for like the oil on the skin and everything. So like, the oil on your skin builds up in certain places. And Yeah, all that kind of like adds to the realism when you layer it all up.
That's cool. Oh,
Yeah,
I haven't thought of that.
And if it's not there, it just looks kind of plastic, you know?
Right.
So,
yeah, that's one of the things that I remember even from, I don't know, like Polar Express, then to Beowulf, and then to all the stuff that people do today that they, even on the new Tomb Raider movie, there is like a scene, I mean, I'm sure there was a bunch of scenes that they want to do all in one shot to show to finish with the face of the actress. So it starts with really far away, which is obviously not obviously, but it's certainly a 3D representation of the character, going and rolling and rolling and rolling until it blends with the actual person. Yeah, so it's cool to do. Time out to get beer. Yeah, we'll cut this out maybe. You were talking about this conference that I went to see like this virtual reality things and how elements get a bit like strange when you're interacting with them. Can you talk a little bit about like this future of like how like your kind of work will be basically the building block for virtual reality, right? Can you talk a little bit about your experience and your thoughts on virtual reality?
Virtual reality or AI?
AI, I'm sorry. Yes. Let's talk first. Yeah, we'll talk about virtual reality later, but like specifically AI.
Yeah. I mean, I did go to that conference a little while ago when there's people there at the forefront of AI, and I can't it's really cool what they're doing, but I can't help but think like, do people really want it, or are they just trying to create it because just to see if they can. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I mean, yeah, some of it was like, you hold up your iPad and there's like a virtual like teller giving you your options, and they're standing in the room as you like, I don't know. They're at the point right now where they just don't really, look realistic. Mm-hmm. But I wonder whether it would be even freakier if they look super realistic.
Right. Yeah, which is sort of like this where I was going at with this idea of like the virtual reality that is powered by this AI machine, where you will always have this disconnect between reality and the actual like this representation of reality, right? And the closer it gets to an actual like real thing, it gets, I don't know, unreal at the same time, right? Because you can sort of tell.
Yeah, but like for like non-human things, I mean, like augmented reality is, they're doing some really cool stuff with that. I think I've seen like a test that IKEA is doing where you can hold up your iPad in your living room and test out different furniture in your house and see what it looks like in that environment.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So basically for like the environment, it would look interesting, but whenever you start getting into people, it's there are certain tells that
well, I don't know, people are really good at picking up whether like something's fake or not when it comes to a person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's one thing, like how do you feel, because one thing that you mentioned, like you graduated in like 2000 or so, and then you had an hiatus, but like you actually worked on this for a while, and you were saying like, before the realism of it was not really there yet, or not really possible, and now it is. Can you talk a little bit about how you feel like the industry has progressed over time in terms of the realism?
Sure. Yeah, so when I got out of school, I worked for a photographer, and I worked for him for 13 years, and I did a lot of retouching for him. His name is Phillip Rostron, and he was probably about one of the busiest photographers in the city as far as like conceptual work goes. So yeah, I mean the stuff I was creating in Photoshop and photography alone was pretty crazy at the time, but you couldn't. CG just wasn't there when I started working in that in the industry, but slowly over time.
But you find one thing that I noticed when I was looking into like YouTube rat hole, finding scenes from different movies from before, that they were like, when I saw, I don't know, like Superman 1 or 2 and him flying around, it's like to me, when I remember watching that, was amazing at the time. And some films, basically, they don't age well when you see them afterwards. Like, oh wow. Do you think it has to do both with like the technology of it, or like maybe the aesthetic sense of people have evolved over time? I don't know how you feel about that.
I don't know. I mean, well, technology has just gotten better. Some of those movies you should just not go back and watch. I remember that movie Anaconda. I used to think the effects in that were really cool, and then I see it again like years later, and it's quite terrible. But yeah, it was I mean, they were doing the best they could in the time they were making the movies. So.
Yeah, and then I guess even the ones that actually survived are the ones that either did a very stylized version like Tron, right? That is like they're not trying to be realistic, they're just trying to be aesthetically interesting, or the ones that use puppetry, right? Like you go back to the original Star Wars or miniatures. It's actually cool. Like I actually still prefer that to all the thing. Yeah.
I think George Lucas got rid of all those like original shots, didn't they?
Yeah.
Like he just replaced all those films.
I remember my cousin had a tape with the original ones. I told him, like, dude, keep this, because I'm sure I'm sure someone scanned it and you can find the original ones. But yeah, like it sort of lost when he added some playing around with the 3D elements. But when you get to movies like, I remember one that I thought was very realistic, a lot of scenes, was in Doctor Strange, I think it's the name, that they even created like whenever he's doing these ray things and these gestures, that even though it's something that of course does not exist in the real world, but it looks like if that thing existed, it would actually interact in that way. Is there any movie that you were or like even other kinds of imagery that you were particularly impressed with the way that they dealt with creating CGI on?
Yeah, well, I really want to see Ready Player One. That has just crazy effects. A lot of throwbacks to old video games and movies and everything. But Doctor Strange is a really good example. Definitely. Yeah, I can't really think of like anything. I always I always watch those movies and I always just try to figure out how they did every scene.
Right, yes, yeah.
I probably trail off in movies sometimes because I'm not really thinking about the plot.
Right, yeah, it's like, how did they do that? Yeah, like it's with me. I went to see Tomb Raider recently, and I was basically entranced with the way that they did the photography. That it's like, it's sort of backlit. She always had like sun on her face, but they do like smooth light on her face. I was like, how did they do that? They mixed this idea of like both contrasty on the edges and very smooth in the middle. And I was wondering, is that done in post or is that done in like the director of photography is actually doing that? So yeah, I know what you mean. I can relate to like, yeah, it doesn't ruin it, but you see it from a totally different
definitely. Yeah. I'll be watching like a 3D animated cartoon or something like that with my son, and I was thinking like, they really nailed the leather on that guy's collar,
Yeah, that's good. And that's another thing to talk about, like, because in CGI there is not only the very realistic one, there is also the cartoonish, for lack of a better word for me right now, like a stylized, caricaturized version of CGI, right? So do you do work in that, or you do more photorealistic stuff?
Yeah, like that's actually this past week somebody asked me if I could do that kind of look, and I didn't really have any examples to like show them, so I did a little guy driving a car. And it's kind of like in that Pixar kind of world, like oversized hands and oversized head and everything like that, and a little, a toony looking car and everything. It was fun.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. So they do. You mentioned like the hands and the head. This is sort of like a translation, even from regular animation times, right? So it's like the CGI elements are sort of not imitating, but like following the tradition of like traditional animation that was not trying to be realistic, right? That was trying to be get the essence of the things. It's interesting that it has this both the hyperreal and the completely unreal one, but still like rooted in reality.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And you get that with because I know you have like 2 kids, and you get, I assume, to watch a lot of a lot of cartoons and things. So do you get inspiration from that interaction?
Oh yeah,
How do you
for
feel?
sure. Yeah. I'll try and like turn on the news, and my son's like, "We always watch the news." I'm like, "No, we always watch Pokemon. That's all we ever watch."
And that actually reminds me of the next thing that I want to ask you. Like going further with that is. I have 4 nephews, as I mentioned to you before, between the ages of 18 and 6. And then the oldest one, even, I don't know, like when he was like a kid, was when Minecraft came into the market. Minecraft, for people that don't know, and I don't know how, you probably are not interacting with any person that has a computer and it's like younger than 16, but it's, I guess, the most... successful video game in the world, and it's still the graphics are the main graphics as they come out of the box, they are this very blocky like squares and polygons that are very rough, and that's the most you have. I don't know, like Uncharted whatever, number 4, 15, something like this, great video games that are so realistic, and then kids gravitate towards this deceptively simplistic like graphics, and then they're creating their own skins, their own like textures and all those kinds of things, and you can actually make Minecraft worlds very realistic, but at the same time they actually tend to go into that 8-bit aesthetic of like Doom or early 90s video games. How do you feel about that kind of stuff as a CGI artist?
Yeah, I don't really have an opinion. I mean, it's like, it's just, it's just, I don't really create video games.
Of course.
But I know my son loves Minecraft. He doesn't like have it at home or anything, but he loves playing it over at his cousin's place. Yeah, for sure.
Because they are a bit younger, right? They're not there. They want to play, but it's like you have to control a little bit of computer time. I was just wondering because that's sort of like in a way I always like the beautiful games like Prince of Persia and those kinds of games that
I don't think there's like any right and wrong when it comes to anything. I mean, like there's I've seen some really like super simplistic artwork out there that's just beautiful.
Of course. Yeah, and the thing I mentioned Minecraft because I think like the next generation of people that will be working in 3D spaces, they're basically being trained right now, right? In Minecraft and those things. That's why that's where I was going with it, because you came from like a more like drawing and like more like, let's say, traditional arts backgrounds, but I see a lot of like kids that are creating these amazing worlds in the 3D space, especially with Minecraft. That's why I mentioned.
Yeah, it's very cool. Yeah, it's awesome that they have access to that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and even like with the virtual reality things, I think like Microsoft was doing this goggles or some sort of like lenses that you could be inside the Minecraft world, because it's fairly, I guess, easy to render compared to other stuff, right? So, for sure. It's interesting. So what's next for you in terms of like commercial projects or even like personal projects? What stuff are you mentioned the cyborg woman, so what kind of work are you working on?
Yeah, well, I unfortunately can't really talk about the work that I'm working on
currently.
But yeah, I mean, I've just been doing like a little bit of everything. I do a lot of cars. And last year I built a whale out of a vineyard.
Oh wow! Right.
So it's like a whole bunch of like little like a vineyard on top of the whale, and I had CG grapevines kind of like streaming down off the whale, and and I had to like build like a mountaintop trail, but as like a sailboat. Yeah, so the sailboat's all kind of like made up of like rock, and the brakes and the sails are made up of some like rivers flowing through the mountains and everything. Wow. Yeah, so it's like always like a little, something different, like as far as the ask goes, which keeps it interesting.
Yeah. Cool. And then in terms of like personal projects, is there something you are working on that you want to share, or like?
I mean, for personal projects, I've been really trying like something new in the sense that like I have a tendency to like kind of like ponder over like the little details and like, really spend, an incredible amount of time on the little things that nobody's ever going to see but myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, but, I know the feeling.
But I'm just trying something a little bit different because I know like a lot of people view images nowadays on Instagram in such a small format.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just kind of like going to kind of, try to use that to my advantage, just by trying out a whole bunch of different things and not spending too much time on a specific like personal project.
Mm-hmm.
Because the more creative little explorations you can do, the more you learn.
Mm-hmm.
You spend a couple of days on them and you kick them out and you forget about them and move on to the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool. So your main place to like showcase these things you're working on is where I found you, but it's on Instagram. Is that the main?
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the way that things are going. I mean, I'd prefer it if like everybody just goes to people's websites, just because like I do have like I love the little details.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, the Instagram platform, you can't really show it.
Yeah, I have the same feel with like photography. Even like I posted one day this photograph that I created that was in a panorama, and he has, I don't know, like 10, 12 people, and they all like important in the scene. It's a plate with like 3 different photographs. So then whenever you see on Instagram, it will be either square or at least vertical, and this is basically a panorama. Now with Instagram, you can do those, like you can swipe and see it, but still you will not see the whole picture, right? So it's interesting how, and then even it forces me to, maybe I will post a portrait or post something that doesn't have all that detail because it does not translate to a small screen, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting how it translates from different, like the medium becoming the message, right? It's sort of like this, you have to adapt to the way that people are seeing, instead of seeing this like, I don't know, this giant photograph or drawing, or in this even like a printout of one of your images on a gallery setting, or at least like a big print. I guess maybe sometimes you have like, if you do outdoor creations that will go into like, it would be printed big, but it would still be seen from afar, so maybe people won't be able to see.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes like, I guess the most close up people get is like when I do like a transit shelter. Those are some pretty massive posters, and people are standing right up beside them. So,
cool.
Yeah.
All right. And then you can see like all the work that went into it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think like CGI is literally the next frontier for artists in general to create the stuff that before only painters in big cathedrals were doing, right? And now you are creating those things and then I think the difficulty now is just how to showcase those works, right? A couple more questions for you. So in terms of if a person like I'm thinking of this as a photographer, right? Like, do you recommend for like people that are into doing collaborations with CGI artists in general, not necessarily like you, but like with CGI, do you recommend that people like photographers or other kinds of artists would explore the tools themselves and try to create the objects and try to learn it on their own, or as an add-on to their photography, or do you think it's a better like fit to just try to find people to collaborate? How do you feel about that as a CGI artist?
Most of the time, I think it's like more advantageous for commercial photographers to like go to the motion side of things than learn CG.
Right.
That's just the way I feel.
No, for sure. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, it's just like, it's a better way to use your time. But yeah, I mean, there's I don't know.
No. So that's
hard to put myself in somebody else's shoes.
I mean, maybe I can flip the question, because the way you work, from what I understand, it's like, if you need like a photographic element, and then how to deal with the model, how to light it, how to do like certain things. I assume you would usually, although you have photographic knowledge, like you would basically, like Matt or whoever you work with regularly, like, oh, can you do this photograph for me so I can use on my project? So the other way around, I assume you would not necessarily go get like power packs and lights and beauty dishes and do all that kind of stuff.
For sure,
right?
Yeah, it's like, we scratch each other's back from time to time with stuff like that, for sure.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering, like, if people want to get into this kind of thing, if it's better to get into the, like, rabbit hole of, like, trying to figure out all that stuff, or at least to like, collaborate with other people. Yeah, it's a good point about
rabbit hole is a good analogy.
Oh, yeah.
Every single, like, new program that I pick up, I always feel like I'm just falling down a rabbit hole.
Oh, yeah. It's like, for me, it was a video, right? And it's like to go into motion, which is... As a photographer, you have an advantage because you're already used to seeing light and framing, composition, all those things, but it's not the same at all. Like, especially if you're working with strobe light, that you can kill the ambient light, you don't have to worry about all those things. And then when you are in the film environment, you have much less options for fixing in post, right? Quote unquote later. So like you have to nail some things. I feel like the way I feel about motion is sort of like, oh, you have to, it's like you're shooting JPEGs. If you're sort of like going into, you have to know what you're doing, right? And have very close to the final like project, unless you're using those cameras that shoot raw footage from, I don't know, like those. I haven't gone into that yet, but yeah. Are you working with motion for your with CGI, or is mainly for still photography?
Yeah, I do a bit of motion. I mean, they're just like little spots. But because I'm just somewhat by myself. I do have like a couple other people that I bring on to like projects if they involve more. Yeah, so they would do more of the, let's say, animation, kind of motion kind of a thing while you create the objects? Yeah, or like, we'll work in conjunction with the retouching and the animation side of things. And then, maybe my partner will do more of the After Effects side of things while I keep working away on the first part.
Yeah. So it's more of like whenever you get into that kind of work, it's very much a group kind of endeavor, right?
For sure.
Not like
I have like a little bit of a team I can assemble in BC too, which is like really helpful because we can kind of make the time change work for us.
Oh, interesting.
Because by the time they wake up, I've already been working for 4 hours, and then they're working for like 4 hours after I.
Oh, interesting.
After I quit for the day.
Right. Yeah. Oh, I didn't know that. That's cool. Yeah. So just to finish off, one question that is about business side of what you do, right? Of CGI. Yeah. Like, can you tell a little bit because people maybe they don't know how it works. So basically, you're like a freelancer that you get jobs from either, as you said, photographers or agencies. So how does it work for you to market yourself and to keep like finding work, or if you have like recurring clients, or like how does that work for you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't market myself all that much at all. It's mostly just like word of mouth. Mm-hmm. I just try to do like the best job possible for people. Sounds simple, and I'm just like friendly and like helpful to the people that I'm working with. I think it's like just like a team effort. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. The person that hires me is on my team because we're in it together. Right. And I think people just come back to me, or they tell their friends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so sort of like word of mouth based on the quality and the experience of the work. Cool. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So, Brad, if people want to take a look at your work, where is the best place to go? I know we want to get you, and actually, guys, you actually want to go to his website and look at images with like, take your time, then just scrolling like.
Take them all in.
Yeah. Like so. Like where's the best places for people to go find your work and take a look?
It's just bradpickard.net. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I have an Instagram. It's Brad Pickard CGI.
Mm-hmm. And then people, like either place, they will find links to either account, and that's where that people put stuff. Great, cool.
For sure.
So, Brad, Thank you so much for first. Thank you so much for the beer, because that's very welcome always. And thank you for being in the podcast. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Cool. And scene. So that's it for today's show. Thank you for listening to the Wanderings podcast. You can find show notes and links at pedrobonatto.com/podcast. If you like the show, I would love if you could share it with your friends or leave a review on iTunes. If you want to get in touch with me, you can find me on all social media at Pedro Bonatto. I would love to hear from you. You can find my photography work at pedrobonatto.com. The music for the Wanderings podcast is provided by the Blue Dot Ensemble, a music and dance group exploring traditions from all over the planet, where I am one of the founders and the lead drummer. You can find us at bluedotensemble.com. So tune in next week for another show. Until then, I urge you to keep following your curiosity, and I'm looking forward to our next Wanderings together.